It's hard to disagree that sales managers are strange people. Some of them believe that sales will be higher after it rains on Thursday or on Black Friday. But the true adepts of our sect know the 10 commandments, and today we will talk about them. Because if you want the spirits of the ancestors of salespeople to help you, then watch this video until the end. Seriously though, we will talk about things that you can implement as soon as tomorrow to become more effective or to test your sales skills. Before we begin, I would like to add that your salespeople will want to make money and enjoy their work. Some people, on the other hand, want to find a job, which is why they go into sales. Many entrepreneurs start with direct sales. For example, one of the most famous marketers whose agency was sold for $2 billion, known as the father of advertising, David Ogilvy, began with cold sales. He knocked on doors and sold cooktops in the cold. Personally, I have made more than 100,000 calls and received more rejections than anyone. But after my first burnout, I started analyzing my work. Same to you earlier. Personally closed more than 15,000 deals in over 100 businesses because each of my clients wants to hear from me how the deal closure will look like for their client. Therefore, based on my experience, I have prepared 10 commandments of sales, some of which I have learned the hard way. What does the first commandment of a modern sales manager look like? First, it is to listen more than to talk. All of my clients told me that they knew this. But when we listen to calls during an audit, it turns out that we talk more than the client. For example, one large distribution company told me that they hired the best trainers, they know it, but they cannot implement it. I helped implement this over 2 years for half of the managers. Yes, you have heard this rule too. But for some reason, if you listen to a typical business call, in the second half of the call, the manager will be talking more. So in the first half of the call, he clarifies everything. And in the second half of the call, he explains how the product works or talks about its advantages. But this is a kind of trap. If we are talking more, we are not listening at that moment. We do not understand the client at that moment. Therefore, when we say something, even in the second half of the conversation, the client is thinking about their own matters. And I know that sometimes you close deals where you talk more. But let's talk about those clients who didn't buy from you. At the end of the conversation, the well-known "I'll think about it" happens, postponing everything. After that, the manager starts calling, pushing, pressing, squeezing, asking when to call back and why they didn't buy. This is a consequence of the fact that in the second half of the call, more listening was required. Objections, my friends, are a result of you talking too much where it wasn't necessary. So how do you do it right? This leads to the second commandment of the modern sales manager. Whether it's a phone call, correspondence, or a meeting, the salesperson must ask interesting questions. Whoever asks an interesting question controls the conversation. As in one of the famous Hollywood movies, the boss says, "I'm the one asking the questions here." It sounds very authoritarian, but in life you need to ask such questions in a way that does not provoke negativity. From this comes the third commandment, to ask the most interesting question, not a survey. An interesting question concerns the client's interest. For example, you can try using the following formula for an engaging question for the client. Imagine you are a client, and I, as a salesperson, tell you, 50% of our clients choose this particular feature, which helps, and tell me why it helps. Please tell me, will this help you increase your sales? Will this help you save time? If you ask this question in the middle of the conversation, you will hear the client's feedback and will not talk more than them at that moment. That is, the question should not just be situational, but it should ideally have a reason why it is interesting to answer. Next comes the fourth commandment. This is empathy. What is empathy? It is when we not only understand, but also feel the client. We will shoot a separate video about this later. If the client feels uninterested, feels skeptical, and the manager does not notice it, then the manager is going in the wrong direction, and the client does not buy. You need to Be aware of the client's behavior. The client is angry. The client is dissatisfied. Their voice is slow or fast. This needs to be recorded and used. If a person is in a hurry or dissatisfied, you need to relax them. You need to be a bit of a psychologist. We will also record a separate video on how exactly to do this. Sales techniques can be attributed to the fifth commandment. One of the most well-known educational companies in Ukraine, which is my client, told me, "We know all these techniques. We already have everything written down. What can he teach us?" After listening to the calls, it turned out that the techniques in the script were outdated, and I was told, "Well, we haven't finished it. We are working on it now." I think it's just a deception. Sometimes it's hard to admit I wrote a script but didn't finish it. So if you know effective sales techniques, no one will object, right? Your clients and managers do too. Let me tell you about another cool technique that few people know about, but it works. It's the technique of silence. It happens when the client is explaining their problem, and it's your turn to say something. But no. Give a pause. The game begins. Who will speak faster? And statistically, this is where clients start talking, adding even more details about their problem. And this is something we can use in sales. This is what silence is. What can we do to get the lead to open up and come back? This leads to the sixth commandment. It's about focusing not on the sale, not on the interests of the company selling its products, but on trust. When trust is present, sales happen automatically. Therefore, you need to sense at what stage the client is, what they know, what they don't know about your company, what they believe in, and what they don't believe in. And then build on that. Sometimes it happens like this. They told everything they knew, like, "Come on, buy it," and for some reason, they don't buy. And don't laugh. Experienced negotiators fall into such a trap. 10 years ago, I had 3 businesses simultaneously. I didn't undergo any training. I had a lot of energy, but I didn't think about how I was distributing it. After I received the rejection, I moved on. Oh, how many clients I lost back then. How to build trust correctly. For this, there is the seventh commandment. Not only knowing that trust needs to be rebuilt, but knowing exactly how to do it. Trust, like any other psychological phenomenon, has its reasons and a clear mechanism. That is, we sometimes neglect them, thinking that I already know about trust, these clients trust me, and these ones do too. Therefore, it is important to understand sales and the psychology of trust as a separate science. Because if you do not study, you remain where you are. Do you think you just need more practice, or do you think, well, I'll sell better tomorrow? I thought so, too, and many others did until they burned out. Take care of yourself in advance, or take care of your managers, because they often might quit. And next comes the 8th commandment. It is important to engage the client, and not with the advantages of the business, but with what motivates the client, which is their own motive. It's something like a client's desire, something deep, but it's not your advantage and it's not the client's need. Understand. Often a salesperson thinks, I'll talk about our advantages, our case studies, our evidence, and the client will buy. But the manager doesn't see this. Or there is not enough time. When we are saying something in a conversation, the client is thinking about something else at that moment. Therefore, you don't need to talk about your values. It's better to behave in a way that makes the client realize what those values are. A king does not say he is a king. Someone who cares doesn't say they care. They show it. Therefore, you need to build your behavior on values. To be, not to try. That's why you need to know the motive that motivates the client. Guessing and knowing for sure are different things. Check yourself. How often do you think you know the client's motivation, but in reality, they haven't directly told you their motivation? Your task is to get the person to clearly tell you what their motivation is. This is a broad topic, and there are several videos about it on our channel. I invite you to watch them. Do sales scripts hinder the rebuilding of trust? We know that scripts sometimes work. We know that scripts sometimes don't work, and sometimes they can ruin the impression of the company. And we want to sell natively, that is, to communicate as a person to a person, not as a robot. We are looking for the balance between a script and native selling, because when we are ourselves, we can sometimes overlook something. We feel comfortable, but we might forget something. Working according to the plan, such a thing is unlikely to happen. From this, we form the 9th commandment. The task of every salesperson is to find their own balance between technology and personal authenticity. And every salesperson goes through their own journey to get there. How can one acquire and achieve all these skills? A training system is needed. From this comes the last 10th commandment, and it sounds like this. You need to constantly learn, not just through online courses, but from those who have already walked a path similar to yours or your leaders. Find someone who already has more results than you, or find someone you have tested in action and practice. For example, to evaluate a business coach, it is necessary not only to review their cases and recommendations, but also to give them a phone and ask them to make a cold call, or invite them to show how they correspond with clients, so that the expert you choose can demonstrate their results or themselves in action. Are you confident in your commandment? Interested? Write it in the comments or ask your question, and I will answer personally. If you want to see a demo of how I call your specific clients, write to me via the personal contacts in the description under the video on Instagram or Telegram. If I call your clients specifically, it will help boost your manager's motivation and conversion into sales. Let there be sales.